The imperial physician's hands would not stop trembling as he turned my wrist over in the lamplight, studying the bruising that had crept up from my pulse point like ink soaking through paper. "Lady my Shio," he said, his voice dropping so low that the candle flame almost swallowed it entirely. "These marks are not from any ordinary sickness. Something has been introduced into your body deliberately, and over a very long period of time." I did not tell him that I already knew. I had known for 3 months, because for 3 months I had been able to hear the thoughts of every single person who came within arm's reach of me, including my stepmother Madame Hua Lian's quiet, daily, almost meditative prayers for my death. The ability had arrived uninvited, cracking open inside me like a seed after a flood, after she began dissolving white arsenic powder into my evening tea. She had wanted to hollow me out slowly, to push me toward madness or the grave before my upcoming marriage could give me any foothold of real power or protection. What she had never considered, not once in all her careful planning, was that her poison might give me something instead of taking everything. And now, as I stood on the edge of marrying the most feared and most pitied man in the empire, the paralyzed Duke Shen Ilong of Baitsang province, I intended to use every whispered thought I had collected like evidence to uncover what had truly happened to my mother 18 years ago, and to bring complete ruin to every single person who had ever looked at me and seen something too weak to fight back. If you are new to this channel, welcome to Lotus Tale Studios. We tell stories that will stay with you long after you finish listening, stories about survival, about justice, and about the kind of strength that gets built in the dark. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a single one. And if this story moves you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Now, let us begin. My mother, Lady Rong Qinglan, died the night she gave birth to me. That was the story I was handed at an age too young to question it, and I carried it for 18 years without ever setting it down long enough to look at it properly. My father, General Bai Zhongwei, was a man whose public face was iron discipline and whose private face was a grief so consuming that it made him careless in ways he never would have permitted on a battlefield. He remarried just 3 months after my mother's funeral. His new wife was Madame Hua Lian, my mother's own younger sister, a woman who had always stood one step to the left of everything she truly wanted. The capital whispered, as the capital always does, about the unseemly speed of it. But my father's grief had made him blind to propriety, and Madame Hua Lian had spent years learning exactly how to position herself beside a grieving man. She raised me with great skill. In public she was the devoted and long-suffering stepmother, endlessly patient with a child who was, according to anyone she spoke to, willful and volatile and difficult beyond all reasonable expectation. In private the warmth was more measured, always present enough to be undeniable but never quite reaching the temperature of something genuine. Under her careful management of my reputation I became known throughout the capital as arrogant, unstable, and chronically sickly. A burden she bore with the grace of a woman who had sacrificed her own happiness for the sake of family duty. That was the story she built around me, brick by careful brick, and I lived inside it without understanding that it was a cage until the walls started closing in. The shift began 6 months before my wedding to a man I had not yet met. Madame Hua Lian discovered she was pregnant, and something in her that had always been tightly controlled began to loosen in the wrong direction. The practiced warmth she maintained in front of servants and visitors began to drop in private moments. Her hands, when they touched me, were less gentle than they had been. The herbal medicine she insisted I drink each evening, which she claimed was prescribed for my constitution, grew increasingly bitter and left me hollowed out and dizzy every morning. Small accidents began to find me with a regularity that stopped feeling like coincidence. A stair I had climbed hundreds of times suddenly gave way. A lantern fell too close to my sleeping curtains. A horse that had carried me calmly for 3 years threw me without warning into a courtyard wall. Then came the evening that split my understanding of my life cleanly in two. I had been confined to my bed for a full week with a violent cough that brought up blood. Madame Hua Lian was telling everyone who visited that it was consumption and that the physicians were uncertain about my prospects. I lay burning with fever while she sat at my bedside stroking my hair with the same hands I was increasingly certain were making me worse. My father stood near the window with his back to us, and they discussed my future the way practical people discuss the rearrangement of furniture, with efficiency and without sentiment. There is a scholar in the Eastern River District, Madame Hua Lian said, her voice carrying the particular softness she used when she was suggesting something she had already decided. His name is Wei Songbua. His family is modest but carries no shame. My Xiu needs a quiet life, Zhongwei. She is not suited to court pressures, and a calm household in the country would do more for her health than any physician. My father made a sound of distracted agreement. He had been unsettled for several days. The emperor, he said after a pause, has announced that he is seeking a suitable bride for Duke Shen Yilong of Beizong province. Even through the thick fog of my fever, I felt Madame Hua Lian's fingers slow against my hair. Duke Shen Yilong, the emperor's most decorated former general, celebrated across the empire for a military career that had ended 3 years earlier when a mysterious illness had left him paralyzed from the waist down. Every family in the capital with a daughter of marriageable age had already quietly ensured their girl was unavailable or unsuitable. To be given to the paralyzed duke was considered a fate only slightly more comfortable than exile. There was no cruelty in the gossip about him. People simply believed the marriage would be a living burial for whoever entered it. Surely you would not consider, Madame Hua Lian began carefully. Of course not, my father said, with a firmness that surprised me even through my fever. My Xiu is not a piece to be sacrificed on a board I am playing for influence. And that was the moment the world reorganized itself entirely. Their spoken voices began to recede like sound moving underwater, and in the space that opened up something else arrived. Not quite sound. More like words forming directly behind my eyes, fully shaped and completely clear. Madame Hua Lian's thoughts came first, and they were nothing like her voice. 3 months of arsenic and this stubborn creature is still breathing. She should have been weakened enough by now to seem like a natural decline. When she is finally gone, my son will inherit Zhongwei's name and his estate and everything attached to both, and I will finally have what I have been owed since before that woman ever took him from me. My father's thoughts had a different texture. Heavier. More accustomed to calculation. If I were to present my Xiu for the duke's household, frame it as her own desire to serve, the emperor would see my family's loyalty demonstrated at real personal cost. The duke is paralyzed and declining by all accounts. She would survive him within the year and come home a duchess. The title would outlast the marriage. It is not without logic. The shock of hearing them thinking so plainly, so nakedly, made me gasp out loud. Both of them looked at me immediately. Madame Hua Lian pressed a cool cloth to my forehead with practiced tenderness, her face composed into concern so convincing it would have deceived me completely 3 months ago. Her spoken words were about fever and rest and sending for the night physician. Her thoughts ran in a completely different direction. Perhaps a heavier dose tonight. Something that will look like the fever simply became too much for her. These things happen with consumption. No one will question it. That night I waited until the household was quiet, then poured the medicine she brought me into the soil of the osmanthus tree that stood in a ceramic pot beside my bed. By the following morning 2 of its lower branches had dropped their leaves entirely and the soil around its roots had darkened in a way that soil does not naturally darken from water alone. I moved the pot to where I could see it from my pillow every time I woke. It kept me honest about what I was dealing with. The ability grew more detailed and more precise over the days that followed. Every servant who entered my room became completely legible to me. A junior maid who slipped coins from the household account into her shoe because her brother owed money to men who would collect it painfully if she did not provide it. The physician Madame Hua Lian had retained to oversee my care, who had been paid a substantial sum to document my condition as consumption regardless of what his examination actually revealed, and who spent his time at my bedside thinking about what he would do with the money once this particular arrangement concluded. Even my personal maid Xiao Fen, whose actual devotion to me was real and had always been real, but who thought of me the way a person thinks of an injured bird, with genuine affection layered over a deep and settled assumption that I would not survive. Through the accumulated thoughts of everyone who passed through my room, I began to map the full shape of what Madame Hua Lian had designed for my future. The scholar Wei Songbua she had proposed was her nephew on her maternal side, entirely dependent on her for his position and his prospects, and fully prepared to manage whatever she required of him. A marriage to him would remove me from the capital and from my father's direct household. Once settled in a rural estate at a sufficient distance from anyone who might notice or intervene, a quiet tragedy would be straightforward to arrange. A sudden worsening of the consumption everyone already believed I had. A fall. A fire. These things happened to young women in remote households with alarming frequency, and grief moved on relatively quickly when there were no obvious questions to ask. But Madame Hua Lian had made one error in all her careful calculation. In choosing arsenic as her instrument, she had given me the only tool capable of dismantling everything she had built. And I intended to use it. I chose my moment with care. My father returned from the palace one afternoon visibly irritated, having endured another of the emperor's pointed references to the Duke of Baitsang's need for a bride from a respectable family. Before Madame Hua Lian could intercept him or position herself in the conversation, I went to his private study and dropped to my knees in front of him and let real tears come, which was not difficult because they had been waiting for a very long time. "Father," I said. "Please. Let me marry Duke Shen Yilong. I know what people say about his condition. I know what the capital thinks of this match. But I cannot bear the thought of being sent quietly to the countryside as though I am something to be managed at a distance. I would rather serve an honorable man with a physical affliction than be hidden away in shame. Please. Let me go to Baitsang." His face moved through several things in quick succession. Genuine shock, because he had not expected this from me. Then the particular quality of stillness that meant he was calculating. Then, very briefly, something that might have been guilt before it was covered over by what appeared to be outrage. He surged to his feet and his voice filled the study for the benefit of the servants he knew were in the corridor outside. "You ungrateful and foolish child," he thundered. "How dare you come to me with this kind of presumption? You have no understanding of what you are asking or what it means. Go to the ancestral hall immediately and copy the Analects from the beginning until I tell you to stop." But his thoughts underneath the performance were entirely transparent to me. She has handed me exactly the framing I needed. I can present this to the emperor as her own heartfelt request to serve. My loyalty costs me nothing if she has volunteered herself. If anyone questions it later, I can point to this moment and say she came to me on her knees and begged. I was leaving the study with my eyes appropriately cast down when Madame Hua Lian swept in from the side corridor, her face arranged into alarmed maternal concern. "Daughter, what have you done?" she breathed, reaching for my hands. I let her see my tear-streaked face. I let her see the desperation I had performed for my father, because she needed to believe it was real. "I will not marry beneath my family's name, stepmother," I said. "I would rather be a paralyzed duke's wife and eventual widow than spend my life as a scholar's forgotten burden in a province nobody visits." Her thoughts detonated behind her composed expression like something dropped into deep water. The brainless girl has destroyed everything I put in place. Wei Yisongbo's household was perfect. The isolation was perfect. Now I have to start again entirely. And then, almost immediately, the recalculation that I had been counting on. But wait. The Duke cannot walk. He is almost certainly past the ability to father children. She will be trapped in that household, childless and miserable, and when he dies she will inherit his debts and his problems and come crawling back to me with nothing. And I will have both households under my management. Perhaps this is even better than what I planned. The imperial decree arrived 11 days later. Lady Mai Xiaobai, daughter of General Bai Zhongwei, was to be wed to Duke Shen Yilong of Baitsang province before the end of the month. Madame Hua Lian performed a masterful public display of reluctant acceptance, pressing her hands together and speaking in a pained voice about a daughter's strange and inexplicable choices and a stepmother's duty to support them regardless. The capital gossiped with tremendous energy. What kind of girl begged to marry a paralyzed duke? What desperation or calculation or sheer shamelessness could drive such a request? I let them wonder. Wondering was harmless. I met my husband for the first time on our wedding day. The ceremony had been stripped of most of its traditional elements because they required things he could not do. He could not lift my red veil with his own hands. He could not walk the 3 ritual circles around the ceremonial fire. His personal attendants carried him into the hall in a specially constructed ceremonial chair, his legs arranged beneath layers of embroidered silk that had clearly been selected to draw the eye upward. I had spent the weeks before the wedding constructing an image in my mind of what he would be like, a man worn down by 3 years of immobility and public humiliation and the particular bitterness of a warrior confined to a chair. I was completely wrong. Duke Shen Yilong was 30 years old and he looked like a man who had decided that his circumstances were not going to define his bearing. He had sharp dark eyes that moved across a room the way a general's eyes move, cataloguing and assessing without broadcasting what they found. His jaw was set in a line that suggested he had arranged his face into stillness deliberately, as a choice rather than a limitation. The broad shoulders above the silk robes were the shoulders of a man whose body still remembered what it had been trained to do, and there was nothing in the way he held his upper body that suggested defeat. He had simply had something taken from him. That was different from being diminished by it. What completely stopped me was not any of this. It was the silence. From the moment my eyes found him across that ceremonial hall, the noise in my mind that had been my constant companion for 3 months simply stopped. Every other person in the room was a torrent of thought and feeling and calculation and anxiety, a continuous flood of interior sound that I had learned to sort and filter but could never entirely block out. From Duke Shen Yilong there was absolutely nothing. No whisper. No undercurrent. Not even the emotional residue that sometimes clung to people without forming into full thoughts. He was a complete and total silence, as though he existed on a different frequency from everyone else in the world. "Lady My Xiu," he said. His voice was even and precise, with the faintest edge of a formality that was not coldness so much as a person being very careful. "I regret that the ceremony could not be conducted with greater dignity. I should tell you now that our marriage is likely to be unconventional in many respects. I am honored to serve this household, Your Grace," I said. One dark eyebrow shifted slightly upward. He turned the word over the way someone turns a coin to check both sides. "We will see what that means in practice." That night the wedding chamber felt enormous in the particular way that spaces feel enormous when two strangers are in them, bound to each other without the softening effect of any shared history. The red candles burned low. His attendants had arranged him against the cushions at the head of the bed and left with the brisk discretion of people well practiced in the choreography of this situation. I sat at the far end of the bed in my full ceremonial robes, straight-backed and still. "You may change into something more comfortable," he said after a silence long enough to become its own kind of communication. "There is sleeping attire in the wardrobe. I want to be direct with you about one thing. You have nothing to fear from me in any physical sense. That is not the kind of marriage this is going to be, and I would not want you operating under any uncertainty about it." "Your Grace," I said. "May I speak plainly?" He looked at me with those assessing eyes. "In this room you may say whatever is true. I did not marry you for love," I said. "I did not marry you with any expectation of a conventional marriage. I married you because I needed protection from specific people who are actively trying to kill me, and a duke's household offered me the only realistic form of safety available to me. In return, I can offer you complete loyalty, full honesty at all times, and practical skills in household management and financial accounting that I understand are currently needed in this estate." He was quiet for long enough that I began to consider whether I had miscalculated entirely. Then he said, "And you believe that a man who cannot walk is capable of protecting you? A duke's authority travels considerably further than his legs, Your Grace," I said. "And from everything I have been able to determine, your mind is in full working order. Possibly sharper than it was before, given how much time you have had to apply it without distraction." This time what crossed his face was unmistakably real. He laughed, and it was a genuine laugh, surprised out of him before he could decide whether to allow it. Then he looked at me with an attention that felt different from before, more direct and less guarded. "You are nothing at all like what I was led to expect," he said. "The reports described someone volatile and irrational. Reports tend to be written by the people who benefit most from the story they tell," I said. His expression shifted into something darker and more familiar. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know that better than most." We talked until the candles burned to stubs. I told him about the arsenic and the ability it had given me, and he listened without interrupting, and when I finished he asked me to prove it. I called for Bao Wen, a middle-aged attendant whose thoughts opened to me the moment he crossed the threshold, loud and anxious and full of specific plans involving the bronze incense burners from the ceremonial hall and a debt his son owed to men associated with the Redgate gambling houses. When I told Shen Yilong what I had heard, word for word and detail for detail, Bao Wen dropped the tea tray he was carrying and went the color of old paper. Take everything you own and leave this household before the evening meal, Shenilong said to him in a voice that was entirely calm and therefore considerably more frightening than anger would have been. If you are gone before the kitchen fires are lit for dinner, I will not send word to the magistrate's office. If you are still on this property when the fires are lit, I will send 2 letters. One to the magistrate and one to the men your son owes money to, telling them exactly where to find his father. Bao Wen was gone within the hour. When we were alone again, Shen Yilong looked at me for a long time. That is a genuinely remarkable ability, he said. And you truly cannot hear my thoughts at all. Nothing, I said. Not a whisper. It is honestly the most peaceful experience I have had since the ability arrived. Something moved through his eyes that I could not name because I had no access to his interior. Then he said, in that case I am going to tell you something that very few people alive know, because I think we are either going to trust each other completely or this arrangement will not survive the month. He was not as paralyzed as he appeared. 3 years ago, he told me, the Empress Dowager Jing had arranged for him to be poisoned. She was protecting the political future of her younger son, Prince Rui, and Shen Yilong had made no secret of his support for the older prince, who had the stronger legitimate claim. He had discovered the plot before it reached its full conclusion but not before the poison had done genuine damage to the nerves governing his legs. He could walk. Not well, not for any significant distance, and not without considerable pain, but he could stand and he could move. The emperor knew the complete truth. The performance of total paralysis had been a deliberate strategy, maintained over 3 years, to create the appearance of harmlessness that would cause the Empress Dowager's network of supporters to become less careful. When people believe a threat has been neutralized, they stop guarding against it. And my stepmother's physician, I said slowly, thinking through the shape of it, is almost certainly connected to the same network that originally poisoned me, Shen Yilong said. Which means your stepmother may be a piece in a game larger than anything she fully understands. Then we will use her the way she has always used other people, I said. And we will be more careful about it than she has been. That night we built a plan together at the low table in our chamber while the household slept around us. Master Kui Bowen, the physician Madame Hua Lian was preparing to send to treat Shen Yilong, would be allowed to come. We would substitute whatever he introduced into the treatments with preparations that were entirely harmless. Every visit would be documented. Every instruction he carried from Madame Hua Lian would be recorded. We would build a case so thorough and so carefully evidenced that no one would be able to find a seam in it. The next morning I turned my attention to the household itself, which I quickly understood was a second battleground requiring its own strategy. Dowager Liang Suyin, Shen Yilong's adoptive mother, had ruled the estate with absolute authority since his paralysis had removed him from active management of it. She had never been a warm woman, and 3 years of increasing control over the household had not softened her. She had adopted Yilong in infancy when his father, her husband, had brought him home as the result of a short-lived attachment to a woman who had not survived long after the birth. She had raised him with maintenance rather than love, treating him the way a person treats a valuable object they are responsible for preserving but do not particularly enjoy possessing. His paralysis had shifted her cold management of him into something more openly predatory, as though his dependence had finally given her permission to stop maintaining the performance of maternal feeling. She made me stand in the outer corridor outside her reception chamber for 3 full hours the morning after my wedding before she allowed me entry. The thoughts of the servants moving past me during those 3 hours confirmed this was entirely deliberate, a display of power so routine in her household that no one considered it remarkable. When I was finally admitted, I found her positioned at the center of the room with the settled authority of a woman who had spent decades deciding exactly how power should be arranged and had arranged it to her complete satisfaction. She was in her mid-60s, silver-haired and austerely handsome in robes that announced her wealth in every thread, and she looked at me the way a person looks at something that has appeared in a space it was not invited to occupy. So, she said. The general's daughter who disgraced herself to marry my paralyzed son. I performed the full and correct bow for a mother-in-law. I am grateful for this family's acceptance, honored mother, and I seek only to serve this household well. Save that for company, she said. Her thoughts behind the cold voice were immediate and sharp. This small intruding creature believes she will take what belongs to me. She will discover her error before the season changes. Your responsibilities in this household are simple. First, you will arrange for an heir through adoption. My husband's family has suitable male children in the second branch who would carry the line with appropriate dignity. Second, you will assist in household management under the guidance of the 2 senior matrons I am assigning to you. They will ensure nothing is done incorrectly. I kept my expression neutral and attentive while her thoughts continued past the spoken instructions. The adopted child will be entirely under my direction. He will call Ilong father and answer to me in everything that matters. As for this girl, she is young and inexperienced and she has walked into a household she does not understand. 2 years at most before she either submits to everything I require or she meets with an accident. Large households have many opportunities for accidents. The upper walkway is particularly uneven in winter. I understand completely, honored mother, I said. Regarding the heir, perhaps a full year would be wise before taking that step. The imperial physicians have not made a final determination on my husband's condition. Acting hastily might invite comment about our confidence in his prognosis. Her eyes narrowed fractionally. She was recalculating. This girl is more careful than she looks, her thoughts noted with irritation. No matter. I have managed far more difficult women than this child. She dismissed me. But not before one final thought rose to the surface that stopped me mid-step on my way to the door. Ilong has been requesting unusual texts from the capital booksellers. Books on paralysis treatments and recovery of nerve function. If he genuinely believes he can recover, and if he succeeds, everything I have arranged becomes worthless. A man who can walk and produce his own heir has no need of my management. The walkway is very uneven near the eastern support. And paralyzed men have always been known to be careless near heights. I returned to our chambers and told Shin Ilong everything I had heard the moment the door was closed behind me. He listened without moving. Then he said, she has been planning this for at least 2 years. The walkway she is thinking of was where my previous attendant fell 18 months ago. The magistrate ruled it accidental. We need to be faster than she expects us to be, I said. He nodded slowly. And we need her to believe she is still in control while we move everything into position. Dowager Liang Suin assigned me 2 senior matrons as she had promised. Matron Wei Chunhua and Matron Deng Lirong were experienced women who had served the household for many years and whose primary loyalty was to the dowager entirely. Their real function was to observe everything I did, report it faithfully, and ensure that any progress I made was either undermined or claimed. Their thoughts confirmed this within my first hour of working alongside them and continued to confirm it every day after that. But knowing exactly what they were made them extraordinarily easy to use. I began with the household accounts, which I requested access to on the grounds of wanting to understand the estate's finances before making any decisions about management. What the accounts revealed was years of systematic and confident theft. The estate steward had been removing funds gradually and consistently for nearly a decade, splitting his gains with matron Wei Chunhua, who provided him cover within the household records. The grain and rice supplier had been charging nearly double the current market rate, with a portion returned quietly to matron Deng Lirong, whose approval he required for his continued contract. The physician responsible for formally monitoring Shin Ilong's condition was billing the household for treatments and medicines that had never been purchased or administered, the money disappearing into arrangements I could hear clearly enough in his thoughts to document. I brought each discovery to Shin Ilong privately, piece by piece, over several evenings. We agreed that dismissing the guilty parties immediately would alert Dowager Liang Suin that something had changed. Instead we kept them in place and used them. Every report matron Wei Chunhua and matron Deng Lirong sent to the Dowager was now a message we had composed and shaped ourselves. She believed she was watching me flounder and make mistakes. She was reading a story we were writing for her consumption with great care. 6 weeks into my marriage I found my personal maid Xiao Fen alone in the inner garden near the chrysanthemum beds, crying with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding something in for too long. She had been with my father's household since before my birth and had been assigned to my service as part of my wedding household. She had come, I knew from her thoughts the moment I sat beside her, because Madame Hua Lian had sent her, and because Madame Hua Lian was holding the comfort and security of Xiao Fen's elderly grandmother over her like a blade. Xiao Fen, I said quietly. I know about your grandmother. I know what was threatened. And I know that what you actually feel toward me has nothing to do with what you were instructed to do. She bent forward and the sound she made was not quite a sob, more like something that had been compressed past the point of containing itself finally releasing. My lady, she said. I never wanted any part of this. She told me my grandmother would be turned out in winter if I refused. I had no way to choose differently. You are not in any trouble, I told her. But now that I know, you are going to help me make sure this ends. Xiao Fen became the most valuable piece in everything that followed. She fed Madame Hua Lian the information we prepared for her with a consistency that kept my stepmother confident and slightly contemptuous, always the most dangerous combination in an opponent. She documented every instruction Madame Hua Lian sent in return, every compound she dispatched for Master Kui Boan to introduce into Shen Yilong's treatments, every letter she wrote to contacts in the capital whose names we added carefully to the growing record we were building. And it was through Xiao Fen, over several careful evenings in the chrysanthemum garden, that the oldest layer of the story finally came to the surface. Xiao Fen had been in my father's household during my mother's pregnancy. She had been young then, a junior servant, but she had eyes and she had ears and she had spent 18 years not knowing whether what she had seen and heard meant what she thought it meant. She told me about Madame Hua Lian's insistence on overseeing my mother's care during those final months, on recommending specific physicians and specific preparations, on being present for decisions that would normally have been left to the senior household women. She told me about my mother growing steadily weaker as the pregnancy advanced, which everyone had attributed to the natural difficulty of her condition. She told me about the midwife who had attended the birth and had left the capital within a month afterward, with what appeared to be a new and comfortable life arranged for her somewhere in the southern provinces. And she told me about an evening, years later, when she had been passing a doorway and had heard the physician who had attended my mother's care during that pregnancy speaking to his junior apprentice in the unguarded way of a man who has had too much rice wine at a celebration. What happened to the general's first wife, the old physician had said, was not what it appeared to be. Some women are unfortunate enough to trust the person who is closest to them and furthest from wishing them well. I sat in the garden for a long time after Xiao Fen told me this. The chrysanthemums moved in the evening air. My mother had died in this story before I was old enough to form a single memory of her, and now the story was rearranging itself into something she had deserved to survive. We needed more than overheard words to make this hold, Shen Yilong said when I brought it to him. We needed something documented and undeniable. That something came, as decisive things often do, attached to a crisis too large to control. Master Kui Boan arrived at the estate 3 weeks after my wedding, brought by Madame Hua Lian herself, who was by then visibly pregnant and carrying the pregnancy with the particular satisfaction of a woman who believes it has secured everything she wants. She introduced him as a scholar of ancient medical texts who had developed promising treatments for paralysis of the kind my husband suffered. She pressed my hands warmly and spoke about family and hope and the comfort she took in knowing Yilong was being cared for by someone so learned. I recognized him. Not from my father's household. From a single glimpse I had not thought significant at the time, several years before my mother's death became relevant to my own survival. I had seen him leaving Madame Hua Lian's private rooms through the servants' entrance very early on a morning when he had no professional reason to be there. He was younger than his formal presentation was attempting to suggest, and his thoughts the moment he stepped into Shen Yilong's presence were completely open to me. Establish trust gradually. The compound is designed to mimic natural decline. It works slowly over several months. When the Duke dies, it will appear to be a progression of his existing condition. The girl inherits. Madame Hua controls the girl. Everything transfers without conflict. After the examination was concluded and the first treatment administered, with Shen Yilong managing his responses with an actor's precision, Madame Hua Lian pressed my hands again at the gate and told me that family must look after family and that she was relieved to know Yilong was receiving proper care. Her thoughts informed me that she expected me to be isolated, miserable, and entirely dependent on her goodwill within 6 months. I told Shen Yilong everything I had heard the moment they were through the gate. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She is connected to the network that poisoned me 3 years ago. She may not understand the full scope of what she is part of, but the connections are there. Then we document every visit, every compound, every instruction she sends through Master Kui Bowen, I said. And we make sure that when the time comes everything we have built will hold together without a single gap. For 3 months we did exactly that. Master Kui Bowen came twice weekly with complete confidence that his treatments were working as intended. Shen Yilong performed a carefully calibrated decline that gave the physician no reason to adjust his approach. And every compound that arrived was catalogued, sealed, and stored in a locked chest whose key lived with me. Then the capital erupted. The Empress Dowager Zheng, who had been confined to her palace apartment since the Emperor's consolidation, moved against him through her younger son, Prince Rui, who had gathered a military force quietly over the previous year while appearing to pursue a life of idle luxury. The fighting was concentrated in the outer districts of the capital, but the effect spread immediately across every household in the empire as people calculated where their loyalty should be publicly visible and whether they had time to adjust their previous positions. Shen Yilong put down the pretense entirely. He rose from the ceremonial chair that had been his daily presentation for 3 years and walked through the courtyard to where his household guard was assembled, moving with a heavy and obvious difficulty but moving under his own power and with his own direction. His steward stared. 2 senior servants openly wept. He did not acknowledge any of it. He gave orders with the clipped precision of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment, and led his guard out to support the Emperor's forces before the morning meal had been cleared from the tables. I went to the highest walkway of the manor and watched the smoke rise from the capital's outer districts while Dowager Liang Suyin paced the inner courtyard below me. Her thoughts rose to me clearly even through the distance and the noise of a household in controlled panic. If Prince Rui wins, Yilong will be executed as a loyalist and everything I have built disappears with him. But if the Emperor wins and discovers that I have been corresponding with the Empress Dowager's faction for the past 2 years, I am finished regardless. The documents cannot be found. They are in the cedar chest inside the recessed wall panel in the north section of my private study. I brought Xiao Fen and we went to the Dowager's study before the second night watch. The cedar chest was precisely where her thoughts had placed it. Inside were 2 separate collections of documents. The first was the Dowager's own correspondence with Prince Rui's supporters, stretching back 18 months, detailed and incriminating in every line. Plans for how the estate's resources could be redirected to support the prince's forces. Promises extracted in exchange for funding. Explicit arrangements for what would happen to Shen Yilong once Prince Rui held the capital, written with a casualness that was more frightening than rage would have been. The second collection was older, and it stopped me where I stood. Letters from Madame Hua Lian to Dowager Liang Suyin spanning more than 20 years. They had known each other since girlhood through a connection in a family that had given both of them less than they believed they deserved, and their correspondence covered everything. Madame Hua Lian's consuming fixation on my father even while her sister was alive. The Dowager's patient advice about timing and positioning and the importance of appearing to want nothing while quietly arranging to receive everything. And then an exchange from the year before my birth, in which Madame Hua Lian described in language that was careful without quite being coded what she intended to do during my mother's final months of pregnancy. The Dowager had written back with 3 suggestions that were practical and specific and written in the comfortable tone of a woman advising a friend on a household problem. My mother had not died of complications. She had been guided toward death by the person she trusted most completely, with advice provided by a woman who had never met her and felt nothing about her at all. I sat on the study floor with the letters in my hands for long enough that the candle burned down a full inch. Then I wrapped everything carefully and carried it out. Dawn came with news that the Emperor's forces had secured the capital. Prince Rui was dead. The Empress Dowager Zheng had been taken into final custody. Shen Yilong came through the estate gates in the early grey light, walking with a pronounced difficulty that he was making no attempt to conceal, blooded across one shoulder and more fully present than I had ever seen him. The household gathered in the courtyard and Dowager Liang Suyin moved toward him with her face arranged into perfect relieved love. "My son," she said, reaching for him. "A miracle. You are walking. I never stopped praying for this." "Yes," Shen Yilong said. He did not move to meet her outstretched hands. It is remarkable what a man can accomplish when he is no longer managing other people's expectations of his limitations. Almost as remarkable as what my wife found in your study last night. She turned and saw the wrapped documents under my arm, and her face moved through 5 different things in a single moment before it settled into something that had dropped all pretense entirely. I have been called worse things by more inventive people, I said before she could speak. Guards. Madame Hua Lian arrived 2 days later. She had come to observe what she expected to be my misery. A husband suddenly walking was an inconvenience, but Master Kui Bowen had assured her the compounds were working. She expected to find me diminished and the household in the early stages of the decline she had arranged. Instead she found Dowager Liang Suin confined to the east wing under guard. She found Master Kui Bowen detained in the outer reception hall, having been collected quietly that morning by 2 of Shen Yilong's men. She found the senior matrons dismissed and the household accounts open on the central table showing every theft clearly documented with names attached. And she found me standing in the main receiving room in formal duchess robes with everything we had gathered laid out in precise order. "What is this?" she said. Her voice was still trying to locate its authority. "This is the full account," I said. "Every letter. Every compound. Every instruction you sent through Master Kui Bowen. Your correspondence with Dowager Liang Suin going back to before my mother died. Your own words, in your own hand, describing what you intended to do to her. You cannot prove anything about Rong's death," she said, and the speed of the response confirmed there was something to prove. "I have the letters you wrote to Dowager Liang Suin," I said. "I have a witness who heard your physician's apprentice speak of what was done the night I was born. And I have Master Kui Bowen, who has already found that cooperation with the Emperor's investigators is considerably more comfortable than refusal. Would you like to hear what he has told them about your connection to the Empress Dowager's network?" She looked at Master Kui Bowen. He looked at the floor with the expression of a man who has understood too late that he made a very poor choice of allies. Madame Hua Lian's composure collapsed the way ice collapses, not gradually but all at once in a single moment. She confessed in fragments that grew larger and less controlled, pressing both hands against her swollen belly as though the child inside her could offer some protection. She had introduced specific preparations into my mother's strengthening tonics throughout the pregnancy. She had ensured the midwife understood what outcome was needed and had arranged for the midwife's comfortable relocation afterward so that no uncomfortable questions would arise. She had known Master Kui Bowen for 3 years before my wedding, had introduced him to Dowager Liang Suin's network herself, and had agreed to use him against Shen Yilong in exchange for guarantees about her position once the estate passed into her management through me. The child she was carrying was Master Kui Bowen's. My father had sustained an injury during a border campaign 9 years earlier that had left him unable to father children, something the military physician had confirmed privately and that my father had never been told because the physician had been paid for his silence and my father had been too proud to raise the question himself. Then she stopped confessing and began to weep, and the weeping was the most genuine thing I had ever witnessed from her in my entire life. The trial was conducted over 3 weeks before imperial judges appointed by the emperor. Madame Hua Lian was convicted of the deliberate murder of Lady Rong Qinglan, the poisoning of Duke Shen Yilong of Baitsong Province, and conspiracy against the throne through her active participation in the Empress Dowager's network. The sentence was carried out at the end of the 3rd week. Master Kui Bowen was held for extended questioning about the full extent of the network he had served and was executed when that questioning was complete. Dowager Liang Suin was stripped of every title and distinction she had spent her life accumulating and was sent to a remote monastic compound in the northern mountains where she would spend the remainder of her days in the silence she had never thought to extend to anyone else. My father, when the complete account of everything reached him, chose not to survive the disgrace. I did not grieve. I had used up whatever I might have felt for him in the study the day I heard him calculate my value and find it acceptable. The household that Shen Yilong and I rebuilt from that point was built on different principles than the one we had inherited. Every appointment was made on demonstrated merit. Every account was maintained with complete transparency. The servants who had shown genuine loyalty during the years of corruption were kept and properly compensated. The ones who had participated in the theft and the deception were replaced without sentiment. The estate, which had been bleeding money for years into the pockets of people who owed their positions to bribery rather than competence, began within a year to show the kind of returns that come from a household actually being managed rather than simply being harvested. 1 year after Madame Hua Lian's execution, I sat in the chrysanthemum garden in the late afternoon light and understood, with a clarity that surprised me, that I was happy. I had been operating inside the architecture of survival for so long that contentment felt like a room I had to learn to stand in without looking for the exits. I was also, as I discovered 2 months after that afternoon in the garden, pregnant. The capital found this information extremely entertaining. Had the Duke not been paralyzed? Had the marriage not been considered essentially ceremonial? The gossip moved through every household in the city and arrived at conclusions ranging from the medically miraculous to the openly scandalous. Shen Yilong and I found this privately very funny during the evenings when we sat together, and he told me about the more creative theories that had reached him through the estate's various connections. Our son was born in the autumn and I named him by Changming, carrying my family name forward through my mother's memory rather than my father's legacy. He had his father's dark assessing eyes and his mother's stubborn stillness, and from his earliest months he regarded the world with the careful attention of a person who has decided to understand it thoroughly before committing to any conclusions. Shen Yilong taught him to walk by holding his small hands and talking to him about the estate's history, moving alongside him with his permanent limp displayed without apology or self-consciousness, showing his son before the boy was old enough to understand it fully that difficulty was not the same thing as limitation. 2 daughters came after, twin sisters born in the same hour on a winter morning when snow was falling thick and quiet on the garden. We named them Shen Lihua and Shen Lianhua. They had their father's stillness and their mother's ability to see past what people showed to what people actually were, and by the time they were 7 the household staff had collectively learned not to attempt any form of deception in their presence. The ability to hear thoughts faded over years in the way that fever fades, not in a single break but gradually, the signal growing quieter and less distinct until one morning I realized I had gone 3 days without hearing anything from anyone and the silence felt entirely natural. It had been gone for some time before I understood it was gone. I had expected to miss it more than I did. What it had given me was not the ability itself but everything the ability had taught me to notice. The breath that comes a half second before a lie. The particular quality of stillness in a person who has already made a decision and is now performing deliberation. The smile that belongs to someone thinking something entirely different from what their face is presenting. These things stayed with me long after the direct access was closed, and they have served me considerably better than the original gift in the years when I needed to navigate a world where no one's thoughts were available to me directly. Shen Yilong's legs never returned to what they had been. He walked with a cane in his middle years and on cold mornings I could see the cost of it in the set of his jaw before he had fully woken and arranged his expression. He governed the province with the same methodical intelligence he had once used to plan military campaigns, and Baitsang became known as one of the most fairly and efficiently administered provinces in the empire. The network of schools along the Eastern River was his idea, argued into existence against considerable bureaucratic resistance over 2 years of persistent correspondence. The expansion of the district roads was mine, funded through the savings accumulated by running the household accounts honestly for the first time in a decade. The hospital established in the provincial town was something we argued each other into over several months of long dinners, each of us dismantling the other's objections until the objections ran out and the agreement stood. 20 years have passed since I knelt in my father's study and begged with genuine tears for a marriage the capital considered a disgrace. The gossip has moved on to younger scandals, as it always does. Occasionally someone writing a historical account of the reign mentions the remarkable recovery of the Duke of Baitsang and the unusual competence of his Duchess in passing. The trial records exist in the imperial archives if anyone knows to look for them, but no one does. The official record states that my stepmother died from complications following childbirth. That Dowager Liang Suyin retired voluntarily to seek religious contemplation in her later years. That my father died honorably in the service of his family's reputation. Xiao Fen stayed with me until her death last winter. She kept every secret with the same steadiness she had shown the night she first decided to trust me in the garden, and I held her hand at the end and told her she had been the bravest person in the household across all the years we shared, because she had been the one who had the least protection and made the most courageous choices regardless. She would have disagreed. She was always very firm about where she believed the courage had actually resided. Our son Changming is now among the most eligible men in the empire, and I evaluate each young woman presented to him with the same care I once applied to household accounts. I am not looking for perfection. I am looking for honesty that has not been dressed up to appear as something more palatable. Last month Changming brought home a young woman named Lin Shuiying. She was the daughter of a provincial magistrate, educated in practical subjects rather than ornamental ones, and she had clearly not prepared a performance for our meeting. When I received her in the garden rather than the formal reception room, she looked at the medicinal herbs growing among the chrysanthemums and said, "This is a working garden. You grow treatments here alongside the decorative plants." "I grow what is useful," I said. She looked at me directly, without the downward adjustment most young women made. "I was told you are very difficult to deceive," she said. "I want to be clear that I am not attempting to deceive you. I know I come without a great family name or impressive connections. What I have is this: I am exactly what I appear to be, and I intend to make Changming happy in the way that comes from being genuinely known rather than carefully admired from a comfortable distance." I studied her for a long moment. I could not hear her thoughts. I have not been able to hear anyone's thoughts for many years. But I had learned in the long time since that ability left me that honesty has a texture that does not require any particular gift to feel. "I believe you," I said. And I did. Shun Yilong is in the garden as I write this, his cane leaning against the stone bench where I once sat beside Xiao Fen and understood for the first time the full size of what we were dealing with. He is watching Li Hua and Lian Hua practice the sword forms he taught them at 9 years old and which they have continued without interruption for 15 years. He looks up and finds me at the window and makes the small gesture we settled into years ago, the first 2 fingers lifted slightly, which has meant between us since the early months of our marriage that all is well and he knows where I am and nothing requires my immediate attention. All is well. My mother's portrait hangs on the wall behind me. I commissioned it after Madame Hua Lian's execution from an artist who worked from the few sketches that had survived the systematic removal of my mother's image from my father's household. We look alike, my mother and I, though she wears an expression the artist caught that I am not sure I have ever managed, something unguarded and genuinely open that belongs to a person who had not yet learned to look at the world sideways. She died trusting the person she had every reason to trust and no reason yet to doubt. I survived by trusting no one until they had demonstrated in full what they were made of. I have wondered many times whether she would find me too hard. I have always suspected she would understand me anyway, because she is the reason I was fighting from the very beginning. My children are alive and well and making their own choices in a world that has no idea what was paid to give them that freedom. The estate runs cleanly and the province is better for it. The man I married as a strategic calculation turned out to be the one person in the world whose silence was the most restful sound I had ever heard, and love came between us the way good things come after long difficulty. Not announced and not dramatic but simply present one day in a way that made it clear it had been growing for some time without requiring acknowledgement. The chrysanthemums are in bloom. The poison gardens have been replanted with herbs that heal. The ghosts have gone quiet in the way that ghosts eventually do when the story they are attached to has finally been told honestly and completely. Sometimes in the evenings when the house settles and the only sound is the garden in the wind, I think I catch something at the edge of hearing. Not words. More like the feeling that words have when they are spoken by someone who means them without reservation. Something that might be the voice of a woman who died the night I was born, telling me she sees what I built from what was taken from her. "Rest now," it says. "You have earned every bit of this." I have. Every necessary, costly, hard-won drop of it. If this story moved you, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Lotus Tale Studios for powerful new stories every single week. We are so glad you are here, and we will see you in the next one.